My own children dumped me in a nursing home and took my house, so I left everything I owned to the maid who actually cared. You wouldn't believe what my three ungrateful children did to me after their father died, or how they fought like vultures over his body wasn't even cold in the ground. But what they didn't know was that while they were busy counting my money and planning their inheritances, I was watching. I was listening, and I was making some very different plans for my estate. My name is Elsie Patterson, and at 79 years old, I learned the hardest lesson of my life, that the people who share your blood aren't always the ones who care about your heart. What my children David, Susan, and Michael did to me in my final years wasn't just cruel, it was the kind of calculated betrayal that only comes from people who see you as an obstacle to their wealth rather than a person who deserves love and dignity. But what they discovered when I died was that their 79-year-old mother still had enough fight left in her to make sure the right person inherited everything I'd worked my whole life to build. Let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand what kind of mother I was to appreciate how devastating their betrayal became. I raised 3 children as a devoted wife and mother, sacrificing my own dreams and ambitions to make sure they had everything they needed. When David wanted to go to medical school, Harold and I took out a second mortgage on our house to pay his tuition. When Susan's first marriage fell apart and she needed somewhere to live with her 2 young children, we gave her our master bedroom and slept on a pull-out couch for 8 months. When Michael's business failed and he was facing bankruptcy, we liquidated our retirement savings to keep him afloat. For 43 years of marriage, Harold and I lived modestly so our children could live well. We drove old cars so they could have new ones. We took staycations so they could go on elaborate family vacations. We wore clothes from thrift stores so they could dress their children in designer outfits. Every financial decision we made was filtered through the question of how it would affect our kids and grandkids. We told ourselves we were building a legacy, investing in family bonds that would sustain us in our old age. We believed that the love and sacrifice we poured into our children would be returned when we needed it most. We were wrong about everything. Harold died suddenly of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March. One moment, he was reading the newspaper and complaining about the neighbor's dog barking, and the next moment, he was gone. After 51 years of marriage, I was a widow at 78, devastated by grief and terrified of facing the rest of my life alone. The children came for the funeral, of course. They made all the right noises about supporting me through this difficult time, helping me adjust to life without their father, making sure I wasn't lonely or afraid. David, who had become a successful cardiologist thanks to our sacrifices, took charge of the funeral arrangements with the efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with death professionally. Susan, now a real estate agent in California, handled the logistics of getting everyone to town and coordinated the post-funeral gathering. Michael, whose business had eventually recovered after our bailout, managed the financial aspects, insurance claims, estate paperwork, all the tedious details that come with death. They were so helpful, so organized, so concerned about my well-being. I was grateful to have such devoted children during the darkest period of my life. But their concern didn't last long after the funeral guests went home. The first sign that something was wrong came about 2 weeks after Harold's burial, when David showed up at my house with a folder full of papers and a concerned expression. "David, I'm managing fine. I'm lonely, but I'm not helpless." "But Mom, you're 78 years old. What if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency and no one knows? What if you forget to turn off the stove or leave a door unlocked?" "David, I've been taking care of this house and myself for 50 years. I think I can manage a few more." That's exactly the kind of thinking that worries us. Mom, denial about aging is dangerous. We've seen too many elderly people hurt themselves because they were too proud to admit they needed help." He opened the folder and spread out brochures for various assisted living facilities. "We've done some research on places in the area that provide different levels of care. Some of them are really nice, more like resort communities than nursing homes." I looked at the glossy brochures with their stock photos of smiling elderly people playing cards and tending gardens. "David, I don't want to live in a facility. I want to stay in my home." "But Mom, this house is too much for you now. The maintenance alone. When was the last time you were up on a ladder cleaning gutters? How are you going to manage snow removal this winter? What about yard work?" "I can hire people to help with those things." "That's expensive, Mom. And it's not just the physical maintenance. You're rattling around in a 4-bedroom house by yourself. Wouldn't you be happier in a smaller place, with people your own age, with activities and social interaction built in?" I could see where this conversation was heading, and I didn't like it. "David, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready to give up my independence. This house is full of memories of your father and our life together. I'm not ready to leave that behind." "Mom, holding on to the past isn't healthy. Dad's gone, and clinging to this house isn't going to bring him back. You need to focus on the future, on staying safe and healthy for as long as possible." "The future I want is to stay in my own home." David sighed and gathered up the brochures. "Just think about it, okay? We're not trying to push you into anything, but we want what's best for you." After he left, I sat in Harold's chair and tried to understand what had just happened. My son, the one whose medical school education I had sacrificed to fund, had just told me that wanting to stay in my own home was unhealthy denial. The child I had nurtured and supported for 43 years was now treating me like I was incompetent to make decisions about my own life. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, all 3 children began a coordinated campaign to convince me that I was no longer capable of independent living. Susan called daily with stories about elderly people she'd heard about who had fallen or gotten confused or been victimized by scammers. Michael sent me articles about home accidents and crime statistics in my neighborhood. David stopped by regularly to point out things that needed repair or maintenance, emphasizing how expensive and difficult it would be for me to manage everything alone. They made me feel like my house was a death trap, and I was too incompetent to recognize the danger. "Mom, the front steps are cracked," Susan observed during one visit. "What if you trip and break your hip?" "Mom, that tree in the backyard is getting pretty big. What if it falls on the house during a storm?" "Mom, your hot water heater is pretty old. What if it fails and floods the basement while you're sleeping?" Every conversation became an inventory of potential disasters, a catalog of all the ways my familiar, comfortable home had suddenly become dangerous and unmanageable. They made me feel like I was being irresponsible and reckless by wanting to stay in the place where I'd been happy for 3 decades. But what really got to me was the way they started treating me like I was already incompetent. They began speaking about me in the third person when I was right there in the room. They made decisions about my life without consulting me. They talked to each other about what's best for Mom, as if I wasn't capable of determining that for myself. "We think Mom should look at Sunset Manor," Susan would say to David, as if I wasn't sitting right beside her. "Maybe we should get Mom set up with a financial advisor who specializes in senior finances," Michael would suggest to Susan, as if I hadn't been managing money successfully for decades. "We need to make sure Mom's medical records are organized and that someone has power of attorney," David would tell Michael, as if I was too senile to handle my own health care decisions. The worst part was that they were so gentle and loving about it all. They weren't screaming at me or being obviously cruel. They were just slowly, systematically convincing me that I was no longer competent to live my own life, and they were doing it with such apparent concern and affection that I started to doubt my own judgment. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being stubborn and unrealistic. Maybe staying in my house alone was dangerous and foolish. Maybe I needed to accept that I was too old and frail to maintain my independence. The turning point came 3 months after Harold died, when I had a minor accident in the kitchen. I was making tea and reached for a cup on a high shelf when I lost my balance slightly and bumped into the counter. A few dishes fell to the floor and broke, and I cut my hand on a piece of ceramic while cleaning up the mess. It was nothing serious, a small cut that I cleaned and bandaged myself. But when Susan called that evening and heard that I'd been hurt, she went into full crisis mode. "Mom, you could have been seriously injured. What if you'd hit your head? What if you'd cut an artery? What if you'd been unconscious and no one found you for days?" "Susan, it was a tiny cut. I've had worse injuries gardening." "Mom, this is exactly what we've been worried about. You're having accidents, you're getting hurt, and you're alone with no one to help you. This can't continue." The next day, all 3 children showed up at my house for what they called an intervention. "Mom, we love you too much to watch you put yourself in danger," David began. "Last night's accident was a wake-up call. We can't ignore the signs anymore." "What signs?" "The signs that you're not safe living alone," Susan said. "The dishes breaking, the cut on your hand, the way you've been forgetting little things lately." "What little things?" "Last week you asked me the same question twice during our phone conversation. 2 weeks ago you couldn't remember what day trash pickup was. You've been repeating stories." I felt like I was being ambushed. Everyone forgets little things sometimes. That doesn't mean I'm incompetent. "Mom, we're not saying you're incompetent," David said in his most professional doctor voice. "We're saying you're showing normal signs of aging that indicate you would benefit from a more supportive living environment." "We found the perfect place," Susan added, pulling out a brochure for something called Golden Years Care Center. "It's only 20 minutes from David's house, so we can visit regularly. They have different levels of care, so you can start with independent living and move to assisted living if you need more help later." I looked at the brochure and felt my heart sink. Golden Years Care Center looked nothing like the resort-style communities they had shown me earlier. This was clearly a nursing home, sterile, institutional, the kind of place where elderly people go to wait for death. "This looks like a nursing home," I said. "It's a care facility," David corrected. "It's designed to provide the support and safety that people your age need." "People my age need to be warehoused?" "Don't be dramatic, Susan," Susan said. "You'll have your own apartment, your own belongings, your own space. But you'll also have staff available 24/7 if you need help, meals provided so you don't have to cook, housekeeping so you don't have to clean, activities so you won't be lonely." "And what happens to my house?" The 3 of them exchanged glances. "Well, obviously you won't need it anymore," Michael said. "We think the best thing would be to sell it and use the proceeds to pay for your care." "Sell my house?" "Mom, you'll never need it again, and the equity can help ensure you get the best possible care for the rest of your life." I realized then what this was really about. It wasn't about my safety or my health or my well-being. It was about my house and my money. They wanted me in a nursing home so they could liquidate my assets and either use the money for themselves or preserve it as their inheritance. "What if I don't want to move to Golden Years Care Center?" "Mom, it's not really a choice anymore," Susan said. "After what happened yesterday, we can't in good conscience let you continue living alone. If you won't make the responsible decision, we'll have to make it for you." "What does that mean?" It means we've already spoken to a lawyer about getting guardianship if necessary. We don't want to do that, but we will if we have to. We love you too much to watch you hurt yourself. I felt like the world was tilting. My own children were threatening to have me declared incompetent so they could force me into a nursing home and take control of my assets. You've already spoken to a lawyer? We had to explore our options, Michael said. Mom, we're trying to do this the easy way with your cooperation, but one way or another, you're not staying in this house alone anymore. I looked at my 3 children, the doctor, the real estate agent, and the businessman, and realized that they had already made all the decisions about my future without me. They had picked out my nursing home, consulted with lawyers about overriding my wishes, and planned the sale of my house. All that remained was getting my signature on the papers or having me declared incompetent if I refused. How long do I have to think about this? We've already put a deposit down at Golden Years, Susan said. They have an opening next week. We think it's best to make the transition quickly before you have time to work yourself up about it. Next week? David said. Mom, dragging this out will just make it harder for everyone, like we're moving a bandage. It's better to do it quickly. I felt trapped, cornered, defeated. 3 months after my husband died, my children were forcing me out of my home and into an institution. They were taking away everything familiar and comfortable in my life and replacing it with a sterile facility where I would be just another elderly resident waiting to die. But what choice did I have? They had lawyers. They had medical expertise. They had power of attorney papers ready for me to sign. They had already made all the arrangements. If I fought them, they would have me declared incompetent, and I would end up in the nursing home anyway, but with even less control over my situation. So I signed the papers. Golden Years Care Center was exactly as depressing as I had expected. My apartment was a single room with a hospital bed, a small dresser, 1 chair, and a tiny bathroom. The walls were beige, the carpet was industrial gray, and the single window looked out onto the parking lot. It smelled like disinfectant and sadness. The staff treated residents like children or invalids. They spoke loudly and slowly, as if everyone was deaf and stupid. They made decisions about our daily routines without consultation. They controlled our medication, our meals, our activities, our visitors. We were no longer adults with autonomy and dignity. We were problems to be managed efficiently. The other residents were mostly people like me, elderly individuals who had been warehoused by families who found them inconvenient. Some were genuinely ill or confused and needed intensive care. But many were simply old and unwanted, discarded by children who were tired of worrying about them or who wanted access to their assets. I had been at Golden Years for about 2 weeks when I met Maria. Maria Santos was a 34-year-old woman who worked as a nursing aide on my floor. Unlike most of the staff who treated residents with professional detachment or barely concealed impatience, Maria treated everyone with genuine kindness and respect. She spoke to us like we were real people with thoughts and feelings. She listened when we talked. She remembered details about our lives and asked follow-up questions about things we'd mentioned in previous conversations. "Mrs. Patterson, how are you feeling today?" she would ask, and then actually wait for and listen to my answer. "Did you enjoy the book your son brought you last week?" she would inquire, remembering that David had brought me a novel during his obligatory weekly visit. "Would you like me to help you call your friend Mrs. Henderson? I know you mentioned missing your conversations with her," she would offer, remembering that I had told her about my best friend from my old neighborhood. Maria was from Guatemala and had come to the United States 15 years earlier with her husband and young daughter. She worked 2 jobs, nursing aide during the day and house cleaner in the evenings to support her family and send money back to her parents in Guatemala. Her English was excellent, her work ethic was extraordinary, and her compassion was genuine. Most importantly, she treated me like I mattered. While my own children visited once a week for 30 minutes of obligatory conversation before rushing off to their busy lives, Maria would sit with me during her breaks and ask about my life before golden years. She wanted to hear about Harold, about the children when they were young, about the house I'd been forced to leave, about the activities and interests that had filled my days when I was still considered competent to live independently. "Tell me about your garden, Mrs. Patterson," she would say. "You mentioned you grew roses. What was your favorite variety? What was it like raising 3 children in the 1960s and 70s? My grandmother always said it was harder then because mothers didn't have as much help. You said you and your husband traveled some when you were younger. Where was your favorite place to visit?" These conversations meant everything to me. For the first time since Harold died, someone was treating me like I had wisdom and experiences worth sharing, like I was more than just an elderly woman taking up space and requiring care. Maria also noticed things that my own children missed or ignored. When I seemed sad or withdrawn, she would ask what was wrong and listen to my answer. When I had trouble sleeping, she would offer to sit with me for a few minutes before her shift ended. When I expressed frustration about the restrictions and rules at Golden Years, she would validate my feelings instead of telling me to be grateful for the care I was receiving. "It must be very difficult to lose so much independence," she would say. "I can understand why you miss your house and your old routine. Your children mean well, but sometimes families don't understand how hard it is to have so many decisions made for you. You're not complaining, Mrs. Patterson. You're grieving. It's normal to grieve for the life you had to leave behind." 6 months after I moved to Golden Years, I realized that Maria had become the most important person in my world. She was the only one who treated me with consistent kindness and respect. She was the only one who seemed genuinely interested in my well-being, rather than just my compliance with institutional rules. She was the only one who made me feel like I still mattered as a human being. Meanwhile, my children's visits became shorter and less frequent. David would stop by on Sunday afternoons, spend 20 minutes asking about my health and the facility, and leave as soon as he discharged his filial duty. Susan called once a week, but spent most of the conversations talking about her own life and problems. Michael sent cards on holidays and birthdays, but rarely visited in person. They had accomplished their goal. I was safely warehoused where I couldn't hurt myself or embarrass them, and my house had been sold to pay for my care. Having disposed of the problem of their aging mother, they were free to get on with their busy, important lives. But they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was too old and defeated to fight back. The idea came to me gradually over several months of watching Maria work and comparing her treatment of me to my children's treatment of me. Maria, who owed me nothing and had known me less than a year, showed me more genuine care and respect than my own children, whom I had loved and supported for over 40 decades. Maria worked 2 jobs to support her family, sent money to her elderly parents in Guatemala, and still found time to sit with lonely residents and make them feel valued. My children were financially comfortable thanks to my sacrifices, had received inheritance when their father died, and couldn't be bothered to spend more than 30 minutes a week with their mother. Maria remembered my stories, asked about my interests, and treated me like I had wisdom worth sharing. My children spoke to me like I was a child, made decisions about my life without consulting me, and acted like spending time with me was an obligation they fulfilled out of duty rather than love. Maria had shown me kindness when I needed it most. My children had shown me that I was an inconvenience they preferred to manage from a distance. I began to think about my will and what would happen to my remaining assets when I died. Originally, I had planned to leave everything equally to David, Susan, and Michael. They would inherit what was left of the house proceeds after my care expenses, plus my life insurance policy, my small investment portfolio, and various personal belongings that had sentimental value. But why should people who had discarded me benefit from my death? Why should children who couldn't be bothered to treat me with basic respect inherit the fruits of my life's work? Maria, on the other hand, was using her income to care for her family across 2 countries while still finding time to show genuine compassion to elderly strangers. She was exactly the kind of person who deserved to be rewarded for her kindness and work ethic.
The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I would change my will to leave everything to Maria instead of my children. But I had to be careful. If my children discovered what I was planning, they might try to have me declared incompetent or interfere with my legal decisions. I needed to handle this quietly and make sure all the paperwork was properly executed before anyone realized what I had done. The first challenge was finding a lawyer. Golden years controlled most aspects of our daily lives, and I couldn't simply leave the facility to meet with an attorney without raising questions. But Maria, bless her heart, helped me solve this problem. "Mrs. Patterson, is there anything you need help with that I might be able to do on my day off?" she asked during one of our conversations. "Actually, Maria, there is something. I need to speak with a lawyer about updating some legal documents, but I'm not sure how to arrange that from here." "I could help you find someone who makes health calls to care facilities," she offered. "My aunt had to update her will when she was in the hospital, and the lawyer came to her. Would you mind looking into that for me? I don't want to bother the staff here with it." "Of course. Let me ask around and see what I can find out." A week later, Maria had found an attorney named Robert Chen who specialized in elder law and was experienced in working with residents of care facilities. She had even called him and arranged for him to visit me the following Thursday afternoon. "He seems very nice and professional," Maria reported. "He said he handles a lot of estate planning for people in situations like yours, and he understands the need for discretion and privacy." Mr. Chen turned out to be exactly what I needed: a competent, discreet lawyer who understood that I was mentally competent despite living in a nursing home, and who could help me execute my wishes without creating problems with the facility staff or my family. "Mrs. Patterson, I want to make sure I understand your situation correctly," he said during our first meeting. "You want to change your will to leave your estate to someone who is not a family member, and you're concerned that your children might challenge this decision." "That's correct. I want to leave everything to Maria Santos, who works here as a nursing aide. She's been more of a family to me than my own children have been." "Can you tell me about your relationship with Miss Santos and why you've made this decision?" I explained how my children had forced me into golden years against my wishes, how they had taken control of my house and assets, and how they now treated visits with me as an obligation rather than an opportunity to spend time with someone they loved. I contrasted this with Maria's treatment of me, her kindness, respect, and genuine care for my well-being. "Mr. Chen, I've been thinking about this for months. This isn't a decision I'm making impulsively or because I'm angry. It's a decision I'm making because I want my estate to go to someone who has shown me what love and respect look like." "Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask some questions to establish your mental competency and make sure you understand the implications of this decision. Your children will likely be surprised by this change, and they may attempt to challenge the will." "I understand that, but I'm 79 years old, not 39. I've lived long enough to know the difference between people who care about me and people who care about what I can give them." Mr. Chen spent an hour asking me questions about my mental state, my understanding of my assets, my relationship with my children, and my reasons for wanting to change my will. He also asked detailed questions about Maria to establish that I knew her well and had good reasons for choosing her as my beneficiary. Mrs. Patterson, based on our conversation, I'm confident that you're mentally competent to make these decisions. I'll draft a new will according to your instructions, and we can execute it next week when I come back. What about my children? When will they find out? They won't find out until after you pass away and the will is read. That's standard procedure. Until then, this remains confidential between us. And they can't challenge it successfully? They can certainly try to challenge it, but based on what you've told me about your reasons for making this change, and given that I can testify to your mental competency at the time you executed the will, I don't think they would be successful, especially if Miss Santos has been providing you with care and companionship that your children haven't provided. The following week, Mr. Chen returned with the new will. It was a straightforward document that left my entire estate, including what remained of the house proceeds, my life insurance policy, my investments, and all personal belongings, to Maria Santos. It also included a detailed explanation of my reasons for this decision to help prevent successful challenges from my children. I signed the will in the presence of Mr. Chen and 2 witnesses he had brought, both of whom could testify that I was alert, coherent, and clearly understood what I was doing. As I signed my name, I felt a sense of satisfaction and justice that I hadn't experienced since Harold died. For the first time in months, I was making a decision about my own life based on my own values and priorities. I was ensuring that my estate would go to someone who deserved it rather than people who felt entitled to it. Mr. Chen, is there anything else you need help with? He asked as he packed up the documents. Actually, there is one more thing. I'd like to write a letter to my children explaining my decision, something they can read after I'm gone, so they understand why I made this choice. That's a good idea. It might help them prevent taking their anger out on Miss Santos when they discover the contents of the will. That evening, I wrote a long letter to David, Susan, and Michael. I explained how their treatment of me after Harold's death had made me feel unwanted and devalued. I described the contrast between their obligatory visits and Maria's genuine care and companionship. I told them I had wanted to leave them my estate, but that they had shown me they were more interested in my assets than in my well-being. I hope you someday understand that love is not about what you can get from someone, but how you treat them when they need you most. Maria showed me kindness when I needed it. You showed me that I was a problem to be solved, rather than a mother to be cherished. I sealed the letter and gave it to Mr. Chen to distribute after my death, along with copies of the will. Over the next year, my health began to decline gradually. I developed heart problems that required medication and monitoring, and my mobility became more limited. But throughout this period, Maria continued to be my primary source of comfort and companionship. She would sit with me during her breaks and listen to me talk about Harold and our life together. She would help me call old friends and maintain connections to my life before golden years. She would bring me small gifts, a flower from her garden, a book she thought I might enjoy, a photograph of her daughter that she was proud to share. When I was hospitalized for a few days due to heart problems, Maria visited me on her day off and brought me a care package with my favorite tea and some homemade cookies. My own children called the hospital to check on my condition, but only Maria made the effort to actually see me and provide comfort during a frightening time. When I returned to golden years, weaker but stable, Maria made sure I had everything I needed to be as comfortable as possible. She arranged for a more comfortable chair in my room, helped me organize my medications, and even convinced the kitchen staff to occasionally prepare foods that I particularly enjoyed.
Mrs. Patterson, you've become like family to me, she told me one afternoon as she helped me organize some photographs. I hope you know how much your friendship has meant to me. Maria, you've been more of a daughter to me than my actual daughters. I hope you know how grateful I am for everything you've done. I died peacefully in my sleep on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 18 months after moving to golden years. Maria found me when she came to check on me at the beginning of her shift, and she was the one who held my hand and said a prayer as the paramedics confirmed what we all knew. My children came for the funeral, of course. They made the same arrangements they had made for Harold: efficient, dignified, appropriate. They spoke about their devoted mother who had raised them with love and sacrifice. They accepted condolences from family friends and colleagues who remembered me as a generous and caring person. But their real focus was on the reading of the will, which took place the day after the funeral in Mr. Chen's office. I wasn't there to see their faces, obviously, but Mr. Chen later told Maria that their shock was absolute and their anger was immediate. "What do you mean everything goes to the nursing home aide?" David demanded after Mr. Chen finished reading the will. "I mean your mother left her entire estate to Maria Santos, who worked as a nursing aide at Golden Years Care Center." Mr. Chen replied calmly. "That's impossible," Susan said. "Mom wouldn't do that. She must have been confused or pressured into changing the will. Your mother was completely competent when she executed this will. I can provide documentation of her mental state and her clear understanding of her decisions." "This is ridiculous," Michael said. "Some stranger talked a confused old woman into giving away our inheritance. We'll contest this immediately." "You're welcome to try," Mr. Chen said. "But I should warn you that your mother anticipated this reaction. She asked me to give you this letter, which explains her reasoning." He handed them the letter I had written, and they read it in stunned silence. "She left everything to a maid?" David said finally. "Our mother left everything to a maid?" "She left everything to someone who treated her with love and respect, something your mother felt was lacking in her relationship with her children." They did try to contest the will, of course. They hired lawyers and claimed that I had been mentally incompetent, that Maria had exerted undue influence, that the will was invalid for various technical reasons. But Mr. Chen had prepared for this possibility, and he had extensive documentation of my mental competency and clear reasoning for my decisions. The contest dragged on for almost a year, but ultimately the will stood. David, Susan, and Michael inherited nothing from me except the knowledge that they had failed their mother when she needed them most. Maria, on the other hand, inherited approximately $180,000 in cash and investments, enough to quit her second job, buy a small house for her family, and help her daughter go to college. She also inherited all of my personal belongings, including photographs and mementos that held no monetary value, but represented a lifetime of memories. But most importantly, she inherited the knowledge that her kindness had been seen, appreciated, and rewarded. Maria still works at Golden Years, but now only part-time, and she uses her financial security to spend more time with her own family. She's also started volunteering with elderly people in the community, providing companionship and support to people who, like I was, have been forgotten or discarded by their families. Mrs. Patterson taught me that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter how old or sick they are. She showed me that kindness matters, and that sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born with. I hope my children learned something from this experience, though I doubt it. People who could dump their mother in a nursing home and take her house are probably not capable of the kind of self-reflection that leads to real change. But maybe, just maybe, they'll think twice before treating the next vulnerable person in their lives as a problem to be solved, rather than a human being to be cherished. As for Maria, she was exactly the right person to inherit my estate. She used my money not for luxury or status, but to build a better life for her family and to help other people who needed kindness. She understood that wealth is a responsibility, not just an opportunity. My children saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance. Maria saw me as a person worth caring about. In the end, that made all the difference. They dumped me in a nursing home and took my house, thinking they were securing their financial future. Instead, they lost everything because they forgot that love can't be faked, kindness can't be bought, and a mother's heart always knows the difference between duty and devotion. The maid who actually cared got everything. The children who didn't care got nothing. And that, I think, is exactly the way it should have been.